Hello, one and all. I hope everyone's doing well with this pandemonium or pandemic and that you're out of the lockdown soon. I just wanted to do something on the seed of the serpent and the sons of God. I wanted to go over some things that may be overlooked and possible new ideas and to find out just what the Bible's telling us and if there might be some clues as to who the seed of the serpent are and if they're with us today. This presentation will replace some other videos I've done. That would be the pre-Adamites in the demonic realm, the serpent seed and the dragon's blood, and also the Satan Exposed series. I think for everyone that takes the Bible seriously, the big question is just what was the serpent in the Garden of Eden? The Bible seems to say that it was one of the beasts. It was a bit different because it was smarter or more subtle than the other beasts. And it was also cursed to be below the beast, so it appears that it was one of the beasts originally. And it could very well be that snakes today are related to the creature that was in the Garden of Eden. Snakes do have some vestigial parts that appear that snakes originally could walk on the ground. And there is a debate in the scientific community that or whether snakes evolved from the sea or whether they originated on the land and then after that went to the sea. We know for certain from the Bible that the serpent could talk just like mankind does, and it's also interesting that in the scientific community it's been shown that some other animals besides mankind do have all the body parts needed for speech. And it's also interesting that it's not been shown conclusively just why mankind has the ability to speak, but not some other animals. It's been proven by studies on feral children, children that have been separated from human society at a very early age, that people are not able to speak if they're cut off from association. It appears to be something that is handed down through social contact. They are not able to teach themselves how to speak. So you have to wonder how the first people learned to speak. It appears they were taught through association with God. And also the serpent had association with God because it was able to speak also. And it appears that part of the curse on the serpent was to lose association, which may have also involved empathy. And so the serpent was cursed to not be able to speak. I think that the serpent race was a creature that appeared very similar to mankind. It had the ability to speak, it could walk upright, but it seems to have had some different DNA, possibly reptilian DNA. That makes sense if it was turned into a snake by God. And I believe that there was some controversy between Satan and God, or a very important controversy, and it was because God had decided to choose mankind as his representative on earth. And this is what I believe is what is meant by the image of God. When God says, let us make man in our image after our likeness, he's really saying that he's already decided that mankind will be his representative on earth, and no one can turn this back, not even mankind. This also appears to mean that God had determined to live inside mankind as representative. Satan probably preferred the serpent race to have this exalted status, and he very likely also wanted to live inside the serpent race himself. When he found out that God had already decided this, it probably made him very angry, and he would determine to destroy mankind, both in body and in character. I'll just tell you, I think that the serpent race originated in the sea or waters, and I believe this because there are many Bible passages referring to evil figures like serpents, Leviathan, etc., and they usually are connected to water. Serpents may have been representatives for water creatures as a whole, and men may have been representatives for land creatures. Notice when it says, God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature, men aren't mentioned. They may have been some kind of the beasts of the earth and were separated out later. Have you noticed that in the book of Genesis, God only speaks directly to a few of the creatures and not all? He speaks to mankind and to the creatures from the waters. He doesn't speak to the beasts of the earth, the cattle, the creeping things. And also notice that only the water creatures and mankind are created. The others are made. And there is a big difference in the meanings of made and create. And notice that in the book of Genesis, light, waters, even trees are not created. They just come into existence. And I thought for a long time that to create something was to call something out of nothing, to bring it into existence. But actually in the Hebrew, to create has several meanings. One is to dig, another is to cut down something. Also it has the meaning of feeding something, nourishing something, but it also has the meaning of selecting something. So I would say that it's possible that the sea creatures or water creatures and mankind were selected or nominated, if you will, to be God's representative on earth. He hadn't yet decided, or he hadn't publicized his decision to choose mankind or the sea creatures, water creatures, to be his representative. He hadn't made that known yet. And the fact that God only spoke directly to mankind and the water creatures may explain why only mankind and the serpent race had the ability to speak, if it's something that has to be learned through association. So at some point God makes known his decision that mankind would be his representative or image and likeness on earth, and this would be ordained and binding forever. And this may have been done through his proclamation of dominion for mankind. Mankind is given dominion over all the creatures. But notice that it says that mankind was given dominion over the fish of the sea. The fish of the sea aren't mentioned in the fifth day of creation. We assume that that's the water creatures. But is it possible that the serpents of the fifth day were not put under man's dominion, at least at that time? But I think by this time Satan was beginning to figure out that his preferred serpent race had been rejected by God, and that mankind was given the role as image and likeness of God on earth. And then God took Adam, who I believe was one of many, to be his mediator on earth for God. And this would be a kingly and priestly role. And Adam would mediate to not only the beasts and other creatures, but also to other men. So when the Bible relates that God formed Adam from the dust of the ground, it's really saying that God was anointing an individual man with the name Adam for a priestly and kingly role. The word formed in the Hebrew has the meaning of shaping, molding, but it's also a figurative meaning where you're shaping and preparing someone for a certain role. In the passage, the word of is not in the original translation. It was added later. So the passage really should read, God formed Adam the dust of the ground. And it's been shown in ancient literature from different cultures that man was widely thought of as dust of the ground. The usual portrayal of this scene is God taking a piece of clay and molding it into the shape of a man. But it seems that the real meaning is that he was taking a man who already existed and was preparing him through some ordeal for his kingly and priestly role. So it appears that this man, Adam, had actually been through some struggle. And whether this was a struggle between men or between men and animals or other creatures or both, it's not certain, but it almost certainly has something to do with the struggle between the serpents and mankind. There are, in fact, ancient Egyptian reliefs depicting the pharaoh being molded by the gods for the throne. And for further proof of this, you can look at several Hebrew words that all have the same root, and they have the meanings of forming, anointing oil, and light or glisten. And the thinking there is that oil glistens and is also used for lamps. And in the passage in Isaiah, God clearly shows us, I form the light and create darkness. So here he is forming light, and it's all connected. We're told that God breathes into Adam and he becomes a living creature. But we've been told before that the living creatures had been brought forth from the earth. And if men were part of that, then Adam would have been already living. So was God actually resurrecting Adam? Had he already died? Had he been part of a war with the serpent race? The serpent race in the form of dragons and other reptilian creatures? So was God rewarding Adam with resurrection? This may explain how Adam already knew what death was when God warned him about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We know that God was forming one individual because it says later that he took the man that he had formed and placed him in the Garden of Eden. I'll just add some more speculation, which may be going way too far, but notice with the trees of the Garden of Eden, we're told that God caused them to grow, but earlier in the Genesis account with other trees, they're just brought forth from the earth. There seems to be a big difference with the trees. If God can take something bad and make something good, you might wonder if God was taking the bodies of the serpents and dragons that had been killed in an earlier war with mankind and was using them as fertilizer to make the trees grow in the Garden of Eden. The word for grow in the account of Eden is samak, and this is connected to the Hebrew letter samek, and it's interesting that the Hebrew letter samek is represented with a snake in a circle biting his tail with his head. This is known as the Ouroboros, the Lucifer, or Phosphorus, the light bearer. Samek is the 15th letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and it's interesting that phosphorus is the 15th element in the table of elements. Samek is the devil's card, the 15th of the tarot. This is represented by a snake biting its tail. This is the light bearer or crooked serpent. In Arabic, the word for fish is samek, and in some dictionaries, the word for fish is also samek in other Semitic languages. Samek could easily be sonic. M and N are very close in pronunciation and are often interchanged for one another. And notice that with sonic, move the vowels around and you have snake. And notice that the consonants in snake are the same in nakash, the Hebrew word for the serpent of the Garden of Eden. The letter samek was an X in Latin and also XI in Greek and Latin. And this is how I believe we get ichthus for fish. And further notice, if you reverse the order of the consonants in samek, you have Hebrew words for violence, for a god of the Moabites and other people near Israel. And you also have a word for the number 15 and 5, 5 being the number for the day when fish and other water creatures were created. The root for the name of the Philistine god Dagon is also the same root for fish and also fertility and grain. There seems to be a connection to all these. There is no Proto-Hebrew symbol for samek. It appears to have come to the Hebrew relatively recently from the Babylonians, and this was by way of the Aramaic script. The Egyptians and Phoenicians depicted samek as an upright fish skeleton. The Egyptians called it the Jed. Is this the Jedi? And it also curiously looks like the cross of Lorraine. This symbol also looks like a tree. A snake tree, a fish tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, fertilized by dead dinosaurs, dragons, Leviathan, the crooked serpent. What was this fertilizing substance? Dragon's blood, petroleum, benzene? Was this the slime that was in the Tower of Babel? Was this in the tar pits outside of Sodom and Gomorrah? Petroleum is used for fertilizers, and it's also used in pharmaceuticals as well as for lighting and fuel. It's interesting that the chemical symbol for benzene does look like a twisted serpent. Or Adam and Eve not only poisoned spiritually, but poisoned physically with benzene from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Then God determined to make helpers for Adam, so he formed living creatures. But it appears that these living creatures were already in existence, and the word formed here just means that they were being prepared for their role as helpers. Then Adam gives names to the living creatures, and I believe that this fulfills his dominion over the living creatures, and it also fulfills their formation. It completes them. I believe they were already living before, and they were fulfilled when Adam gave them names. The dominion given to mankind may have come through several stages. The first stage may have been an actual war between men and the beasts, led by amphibious serpents and other men that had defected to the side of the beasts. I think that men may have had the ability to possess and control animals by telepathic powers. They would have to go into some kind of deep trance or sleep where they could use their mind and soul to possess the animal. I think that men would lose this ability if they transgressed against the commands of God. The second stage appears to be the exaltation of the man Adam over the beasts and other men, and the final stage would be the naming of the beasts. We assume that the names given to the beasts were spoken aloud. Speech requires breath, so I believe that Adam was trying to impart the breath of life that had been given to him by God to the beasts. But I think that the beasts were not able to retain the name or the word given, so this would make them inferior as helpers for Adam. That also means that they couldn't speak back to Adam. They couldn't converse with him. They were dissociated. They had no empathy or real charity with Adam. They could be controlled by Adam or obey Adam, but they had no bond, a lasting bond with him. Then God tries again to make an acceptable helper for Adam, and a woman appears, but I think that the common portrayal of this is misleading. We know from a preceding passage that females were already in existence along with males, and also that females had been nominated by God to be his representative along with males and also serpents. And it wasn't apparent yet just which would be the representative, whether females, males, or serpents. So we're told that God causes a deep sleep to fall on Adam, but what it's really saying is that Adam fell asleep or went into a deep trance and had a dream or vision of the woman. Then we're told that God opens up Adam and takes out a rib and makes a woman from it. But what I think it's really saying is that God was taking out a part of Adam's soul or mind, and he was sending that to a woman that was already in existence. The word for rib in the passage actually also has the meaning of side or part. And when it says he opened up his flesh, he was opening up Adam himself. So it may be that what was happening was that Adam, through his trance, was drawing the woman to him with God as a mediator. And if you remember, I had said that humans had the ability to possess animals, which meant they could actually live inside and control an animal, but they didn't have the ability to do this to other human beings. God would have to mediate between them so that someone couldn't be made into a robot for someone else. And that's what was happening here. The woman would not be Adam's robot. She would be an equal partner in his role as a king or a priest on earth. It appears that God was creating a bond between Adam and the woman, and where we read that God took a rib from Adam and made a woman out of it, it's probably really saying that God was taking a part of Adam and placing it in a woman that already existed. The word for make in Hebrew in this passage is different than in others. The word is bana, which does mean to make, but it also means to build, to repair, to establish, to obtain. So it appears that God was preparing or establishing the woman, and probably for a family. It's interesting that the word bana is the same root for ben, which means son, so it does point to a family. This is where God brings the woman to Adam, and he knows that she's a part of him from his vision. Adam reveals this by the name that he gives to the woman, and she is an acceptable helper, mostly because she's a part of him and can speak with him. Eve was able to retain the word or name given to her by Adam. This was also the breath of God through Adam. I believe this word or name is contained in the breath of God, and this is what is called the seed of the woman. This seed would be preserved in the family of Adam and Eve. It would be passed on continuously. This would be through charity, empathy, or compassion, and this would be manifested in the ability to talk. I'll just add that it's very interesting that the Hebrew words for woman and breath are very similar. Woman is nashim in Hebrew, and breath is nashema. Nashema has been also translated as wind, soul, and spirit, and both words are also connected to a word for fire. So you might say that Eve was Adam's soul and fire or flame. I'll just stop here and address a problem that I'm sure many will have if Adam and Eve were not the only humans at the creation, and that's the problem with the Christian doctrine of original sin. And that is that if all sin came through Adam, and if we're all descended from Adam, then if there were other people, then some people might not need salvation because they didn't have original sin. But I'll just say that Adam, before he sinned, was innocent, but he wasn't righteous. So if there were other people, they would have been only innocent, and there is a difference. Adam became righteous through God. And also, it may not matter because everyone was killed at the flood, weren't they? Only Noah, his sons, and their wives survived, and we assume that they were all descended from the man Adam. And I'll just add one other peculiar thing. Notice in the flood account when Noah was bringing beasts into the ark and he was bringing them in male and female, in one of the passages the Hebrew words for male and female are different than the others. In this passage they use the words for man and woman. So you might ask if other men and women were being brought onto the ark, and these would have been other Adamites that weren't descended directly from the man Adam. And for the serpents, if they were able to fly originally, they may not have lost that ability yet by the time of the flood. And if they were turning into snakes, they may have been able to swim. So either way, they might have been able to survive the flood. So what we have so far is we see men and women and possibly even serpents being elevated above a beastly status. And we also see a bond being created between men and women, but not necessarily the serpent. And also the secret of speech seems to be in empathy, or what you might call love or charity. And anyone deviating from this you could call a sociopath or a psychopath. This charity must be handed down uninterrupted from one generation to the next if speech is to be maintained. Then we see the struggle erupt between the serpent, men, and women. There's a curse on each race entirely, and it appears that part of the curse would manifest gradually over time. As part of the curse, God mentions the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, and that these seeds would always be at war. We know that the seed of the woman is really Adam's seed, and also God's seed, or it's the ordained seed of God's manifestation, and that the serpent is clearly the manifestation of Satan's DNA or instructions. We know that DNA is a blueprint that has a certain code or formula, and I think this is what the Bible refers to as kind when the creatures are brought into being. Every kind has a certain formula or code. The word used for kind in the Hebrew is min, and this is the same root for mina, which means weight. And we know that a weight is a certain mathematical number or quantity. So a few problems for Satan become apparent. His preferred serpent race is doomed to be lowly snakes and possibly even unable to speak. They would also not be the image of God. So you can see Satan plotting to maintain some contact or association between serpents and humans, even though they were cursed to be at war with each other. And he also would want to destroy mankind and also make the serpent race to be the image of God again. But he had a problem. Since God had already ordained that man would be the image, Satan would have to mix his DNA with the DNA of man, maintaining social contact and also destroying mankind. I'll just say that not all angelic beings connected to reptiles are necessarily evil and have not all rebelled against God. The seraphim are connected to reptiles, and the word for seraphim in Hebrew is connected to a word for snake. Remember, the lowly snakes were just a beast that Satan had originally preferred, and the seraphim may have taken over as the angelic representative for snakes after Satan sinned. I think many of these seraphim are also known as watchers. The word for watcher is ear, and this is related to another Hebrew word, ur, which means to watch and to open the eyes, and also to be naked. And it's interesting that Satan was the one that opened the eyes of Adam and Eve, and then they knew that they were naked. I believe that Satan himself was also one of the watchers, or over the watchers. You might ask if Satan discovered that if you could mix the DNA of different creatures, then you could have a spirit dwell in that creature besides the spirit that would normally dwell in that creature, because God had already commanded that the creatures would have a certain specific DNA or code or kind, and that if this was violated, there would have to be some other spirit living in that, and Satan would have realized that rebel angels could dwell in these kind of creatures, and also his ultimate goal would be to have human beings mixed with serpents so that Satan could dwell in these creatures and they could take over the earth as his image. It appears that one of the first steps for Satan to mix the seed or DNA of the serpent with mankind would be through corruption, and this would first be through the murder of Cain. Sin would act as a doorway for Satan to induce people to certain acts which would corrupt them, and this would open up their DNA for mixing with the serpent seed. This is what I think the mark on Cain was actually about, I think that God actually altered Cain's DNA. This was something done in his blood. And this was part of his punishment. It did also act to protect him in some ways, but I think it also opened him up to be able to mix with the serpent race. And I'll have to say here that I don't accept the doctrine or dogma that Cain was actually the son of Satan, that Satan had had relations with Eve. I don't accept that. I think that Cain was a normal human being at first, but he was altered by his actions. I don't know what the science is about the possibility of mixing different species, but I think that there is a way to do it. And I think when Cain's DNA was altered, it had something to do with the iron content in his blood. It was changed, and this allowed his descendants to be able to mix with other creatures like the serpent race. The Bible tells us that violence and evil were increasing after Adam's sin. This was no doubt helped along by Satan. I would say that with acts of violence and other evil acts, mankind was becoming more and more dissociated, and they were becoming like the serpent race, which was falling into a loss of speech through its curse. If you remember, part of Cain's curse was that he would no longer be able to produce anything from the earth. Adam had been cursed, but he was still able to produce. It was just much harder. So Cain became a vagabond, and to survive, he would have to eat things that had been banned by God, like meat, roots, leaves. Cain also probably became a cannibal and would even drink blood to survive. So all these things were acting to change his body, and this was actually preparing him to be able to mix his seed with the serpent seed. One question that gets asked a lot is just who did Cain marry? Was it someone outside Eden that was not from Adam and Eve, or was it one of the children of Adam and Eve? And another thing is, was Cain actually not the son of Adam, but the son of the serpent? But I think that the answer to the question is actually more startling. According to ancient Assyrian records in the British Museum, which contain king lists, which are believed to be history or myth or a mixture of both, Cain or Sargon made a pact with the serpent to rule the world. The serpent was known by several titles. One was Baal or Lord, and also Marduk. The serpent was also known as Aki, a water spirit, which was known by Enoch as Azazel. This was the very serpent of the Garden of Eden. To finish the pact, Cain had to marry the serpent's daughter Ishtar. Cain would give his bone marrow or life force to the serpent race and all its descendants. Ishtar was also known as Lilith, also Sheba, Kali, and Nina, among other things. The name Ishtar is actually related to the root for iron and also for estrogen and anger. It's interesting because I had said that Cain's iron level may have changed when the mark was placed on him, and it seems like no accident that he would be drawn in this way and able to intermarry and interbreed with Ishtar. Her name is connected to the Greek word aster for star, and this is clearly connected to the Greek sideros, which means constellation, and this is clearly connected to the word siderite in English, which means iron meteorite. So there's a clear connection between iron meteorites and Ishtar. Meteorites were believed to be fallen stars, and I do believe that there was a connection with the fallen sons of God. And according to the Bible, who were the first workers in iron and brass but none other than Cain and his family? It's widely held that Cain's descendants are mentioned in the Bible as Kenites, and this name is connected to the word for smith or iron worker, so here we can see a clear connection to Cain and iron. As for Ishtar, you can see the name Ishtar in the word estrogen, Ishtar, estro, and these are all related to words for iron, anger, and also sexual heat in animals or even humans. This is a type of madness, and also anger. Ire is related to the word for iron. And you can see how the original warning that God gave to Cain was that if he basically didn't control himself, control his anger, he was going to sin, and he was going to have the consequences of that. Estrogen is a hormone connected closely to stress, fear, anger, sexual madness, and high levels of it can impair the ability to control the emotions, and this was typical for Cain and his family. Estrogen is an important hormone for growth and healing, And it's interesting that Ishtar was also known by the name Nina, which means fish. And I had said before that fish were connected somehow to growth. There's a related Hebrew word, nun, which means perpetuity. And this may have some connection to growth and regrowth, growth cycles in life. It's interesting that Nun was long depicted as none other than a snake. Is this some kind of water snake? I'll just speculate again about the origins of Ishtar. I had said that she was the daughter of the water spirit Aki, none other than the serpent of the Garden of Eden. The serpent seems to have been just a mouthpiece or puppet for Satan. And I had said that human beings may have had the ability to enter into a trance and live inside and control an animal. So it may be that there was some woman named Ishtar or also Lilith that had this ability and was able to manipulate a serpent. And Satan also may have been part of this. Together, this woman and Satan may have had the serpent birth a child through some kind of zoogenesis or self-generation. We know that some reptiles and other creatures may have the ability to birth without sexual relations. They can break off a part of themselves. So it may be that there was a natural woman named Ishtar who possessed a serpent and had herself birthed through that serpent, which would be her father. The natural woman may have died through the process, being in a trance. She put part of herself into the serpent and then had herself birthed from the serpent as the daughter. In other words, the serpent may have been a hermaphrodite, having both sexes, and you might wonder if this is the reason why the satanic Baphomet figure is often depicted as a transgender. Is this the spirit behind the transgender movement? As for this reborn Ishtar, she would be the first hybrid creature, a mixture of man and serpent. The English word iron is directly related to the Greek word hieron, which means holy. It's believed that the first iron was derived from meteorites, so it would clearly have been viewed as a heavenly gift, a holy gift from the gods. And this may be a gift given to Cain's family and would have been their advantage over other men. This would have come through the pact with Satan, the serpent, and his daughter Ishtar. And Ishtar is obviously the same as the Canaanite goddess Astarte or Ashtoreth, the queen of heaven. Their pact with Cain included the gift of the meteorites, which I believe is how the fallen angels first entered the earth. I believe that God had to allow this, and Satan was part of it. And God was trying to use the fallen angels to help mankind and bring peace. But God obviously knew what was going to happen, and this would all be ultimately part of his plan. If you notice in the Bible, many of the enemies of the Israelites had the advantage of iron, like the Canaanites. Here we could very well see the first legal marriage or marriage license. This was something not acceptable to God. God had obviously ordained the bond between Adam and Eve, but this was a holy bond. The pact between Cain and the serpent was a mixture, a license to mix races that should not be together, like the serpent race and man. And this is what I think Jesus was referring to when he talked about marrying and giving in marriage, just as in the days of Noah. It's not that marriage is bad in itself, but a marriage license implies some kind of pact that should not exist, and it also implies a hybrid race. So even though people who are not really hybrids who are getting a license, they're putting a spirit of hybrids over their marriage, which curses the marriage, I believe. I think that there are two kinds of marriage that are symbolized with the fig leaves that Adam and Eve made for themselves, and then the animal skins that God prepared for Adam and Eve. The fig leaves represent a religious secular marriage, which is a binding contract that actually is cursed by Satan. Then there is a spiritual marriage that is blessed by God with animal skins, which point to the blood of Christ and also points to the marriage of Christ with the earth. The Bible tells us that the Amorite king Og was very large according to the size of his iron bed. Some have surmised that the iron bed symbolized a relation to the goddess Ishtar, and this was connected to sexual madness and warlike wrath. So the bed was possibly involved in some kind of ritual. but some have also speculated that the bed was actually a sarcophagus or coffin. So was Og actually some type of vampire sitting in a coffin like Dracula? We're also told that Og was the last of the remnant of the giants, but the word for giant used in this passage is different from other passages which use Nephilim for giant. The word used for Og is Rephaim. This is from a Hebrew root meaning to heal or revive. So was Og some type of undead, a person that has been revived? So I would say that these Cain-serpent hybrids became the rulers over men, and they would become connected to the sons of God. The term sons of God in the book of Genesis is only a title of adoption and legal status. It's not actually blood relation. In the book of Luke, in the genealogy of Jesus, Adam is called the son of God, but this genealogy is only referring to legal status. The genealogy in the book of Matthew uses begat, which is actually blood relation. I think that God was using these hybrid rulers to maintain order of even the natural men who were rebellious toward God. And then I think that God sent the watchers, or sons of God, to bring peace. They were sent so that mankind could preserve speech because they were becoming dissociated. They were also sent to give wisdom to the hybrid rulers. But I think that Satan twisted many of these sons of God to turn against mankind and to actually aid the hybrid rulers. It's interesting that the royal headdress of the pharaohs had an ornamental snake called the uraeus. This was from the Egyptian word uro for asp. This was a common sign of kingship. And it's also interesting that this is clearly related to the Chaldean word ur and the Hebrew word ur, which I mentioned earlier, and also the Hebrew word or for light. I think that these sons of God were some of the most powerful angelic beings, but they were fooled and seduced by Satan to possess the bodies of the hybrid rulers, that is, to live inside them. But the sons of God would have to leave off their spiritual bodies or heavenly bodies to do this, and I believe that's what the book of Jude is referring to when it says that the angels that left their own habitation and their natural state, they actually took a different state. I think it's clear from the Bible that Satan would use lust to seduce the sons of God into taking over the bodies of the hybrid rulers. Fallen sons of God would want to have an earthly body so that they could have sexual relations with the daughters of men. It also appears that Satan fooled the sons of God into entering into legal marriage contracts. This was supposedly with the purpose of possessing estates, domains, lands, and other possessions by inheritance. But inheritance points to death. So the sons of God or fallen angels may have been unknowingly entering into death contracts, and they would also be banished by God for their sin. So the possessions would ultimately revert to Satan. The sons of God were unknowingly leaving off their immortality for the mortality of earthly beings. And you have to ask, just what kind of body did the sons of God have before they took over the bodies of the hybrid rulers? And they would have to leave off these bodies. I would say that their original bodies were actually stars, that stars are the spirit body for a powerful angelic being. The spirit of an angel can't live in just any body. Like if it lived in a man or an animal, it would actually destroy the man or the animal. But I think that Satan also knew that he could use these angelic beings to repair the dying bodies of the hybrid rulers. They were actually diseased because they had mixed DNA that couldn't actually be together. So the angelic beings would act to preserve the lives of these hybrid rulers. And I think that this is what is referred to in the book of Daniel, where it says that iron and clay don't mix, and this will be the downfall of the wicked empires. The clay would refer to mankind, the iron would refer to the serpent race, and I said before that I thought that when Cain was cursed and a mark was placed on him, this was a change in his DNA. His blood iron level would rise, and this would be a mark of his race, or the hybrid race. And these wicked hybrid rulers had the same problem. Their DNA was a mixed form, and it was bringing them disease. They would have to revert like Cain to cannibalism, blood drinking, eating banned foods, certain drugs to maintain their health. and they would also have the fallen angels coming into their bodies to preserve them. I think it's widely accepted that Satan sought to contaminate mankind, and this would give him the rule over the earth by default. And also, as his hybrid race was increasing, they would need to intermarry more and more with the remaining pure humans. They would need their blood and their DNA to maintain their diseased bodies. The fallen angels were also lusting through the hybrid men that they possessed for the daughters of men. They would teach the daughters of men curious arts using the sorcery of drugs and banned foods like roots and meat, drinking blood, cannibalism, anything that would corrupt the DNA of the daughters of men. And this would help them to be more fertile and bring forth hybrid children to the hybrid rulers. Alien genetic material could contaminate a human body through eating meat. Meat and other banned foods could also bring a human under the influence of other humans, and also hybrids and beasts. No doubt the fallen angels also taught mankind bestiality and incest. This would further corrupt their DNA, and I think that the fallen angels quickly developed scientific knowledge with blood and biochemistry, and they were able to aid in the further mixing of different creatures. And these creatures would have different abilities taken from the best features of different animals, like vision from an eagle, or speed of a cheetah, strength of an ox. And I think that there were many creatures that were developed that had these characteristics. Many of them probably couldn't last because this was a mixing of DNA that shouldn't be together. At some point, the giants appear, mentioned in the Bible, also known as the Nephilim. And one characteristic they had, among many others probably, was their size. Maybe not all of them, and maybe some of them were very small. But it's been noted in the scientific community that one characteristic of fish and some reptiles is that they will not stop growing. And that is, if they have enough food and nourishment, they can keep growing. So this may explain why some of the giants were very large, and this was one of their notable characteristics. It actually would help in their downfall because it was very obvious who they were. So God judged mankind with these hybrid giant rulers, and it's interesting that if these hybrids originated with the serpent race from the waters, they were all killed by water in the flood. And notice also that after Noah and his family survived the flood, they were given authority to pass judgment on other men for bloodshed. They had been banned from doing that before by God after Cain's sin, but now with Noah they were able to execute capital punishment. But notice also that God allows men to eat things that they had not been allowed to before, and this does seem to point to the problem with the foods that were banned before. And also notice that they were still not allowed to eat blood, so you can see how blood might have been a problem with the corruption of mankind and helped create the hybrid race in the first place. You know that Satan would have to work fast after the flood to corrupt mankind again, and this may be what was happening with Ham's sin and Noah's curse on Ham's son Canaan. Some speculate that this was incest that Ham committed with his mother, and also it's believed that Nimrod also committed incest with his mother, and this again would corrupt mankind. It would corrupt the DNA. It would somehow cause a kink in the DNA. You're actually missing one part of the tree. So again, we see Satan acting to corrupt man again even after the flood, and this was possibly how the giants returned after the flood. They would resume the oppression of mankind with advanced knowledge, and they would take the pure religion that Cain stole from Abel and mix it with human sacrifice, blood drinking, and cannibalism in mockery of the coming communion of Christ. According to the book of Enoch, giants and corrupted men would become demons after they died in the flood. Corrupted women would become sirens. In the New Testament, in one of the stories of the casting out of the demons were cast into swine. And where did the demons go when they went into the swine? They went right into the waters. So here we see demons and waters connected again. Is this the connection with the hybrid race and the serpent race? So now you have to ask a few questions about these hybrids and these strange creatures. and that is, are they still with us today? Are they still around today? Have they learned how to hide themselves? Have they figured out how not to grow so that they're so conspicuous? And do they have the ability to shapeshift? And I think the answer to the question is that yes, they are still around today, and I think we know who they are. We can tell a lot by what they do and what they say, how they act. And I think that they did figure out a way to hide among mankind. This hybrid race would certainly be found in Cain's people, the Kenites, and the people of Nimrod. They would later be found in the enemies of the Israelites, Babylonians, Canaanites, Amorites, Sodomites, Edomites, Amalekites, Egyptians, Philistines, and many others. These serpents in disguise would mix with many Israelites, delighting and masquerading as the people of God. I'm sure one way to tell who they are is by their speech and their arrogance. There's just a way about them. They're able to talk, but they don't seem to converse with you, if you know what I mean. Their craftiness can make it difficult to distinguish who they are, but one thing I would say to look for might be an extremely high level of iron and ferritin in the blood. This may indicate the hybrid race. It also might indicate a normal human being that has done things like blood drinking, cannibalism, things like that. But I'll just read something that I have. I don't have the actual source on this, and I can't say how true all this is, but the hybrid race does not have human white blood corpuscles. They have a floating rib. They don't have normal human fingerprints. They have brain waves that are opposed to human brain waves. They have no corona of light around brain nerve fibers like normal human beings do. And so this could indicate a race that should not be on the earth. It's not a race that was created by God. It should not exist, and God is going to eliminate this race. And I'm not saying that this is a normal race, and it's not any one race that we know of, like black, white, Asian, anything like that. This is actually a race that is hidden in all the races. So this is just information to understand what this race is and what they're about. And I think we all know who they are. You can see them by their actions, what they say and do, and it eventually will all be exposed.